Get up. Get up.
She's already turned off her hearing aids, stuck her fingers in her ears.
We're walking now.
I've got your stuff. We have your problem. We have your stuff.
In this episode of Recapianalis, we will go over the incident that took place on September 13th, 2022 at Austin-Bergstrom International Airport. The incident would lead to a hearing impaired 71-year-old woman named Karen McGee being arrested by Austin police officers because she couldn't hear that she was trespassed from the airport after missing her flight. In addition to analyzing the body cam video, we will examine her lawsuit against the city of Austin, Travis County, and the unnamed officer who broke her wrist. I'm your host, Reno Misconduct. Let's get started.
Unless travel or have no business leave. If you are found on this property or remain after this notice, you will face arrest for the offense of criminal trespassing. Ms. McGee.
This is Karen McGee. She is 71 years old with bilateral hearing loss. Mrs. McGee began losing hearing at approximately 20 years of age when she was enrolled in school to become a speech-language pathologist. Over the past 50 years, her hearing has drastically worsened, and today she can hear very little. Mrs. McGee also suffers from severe anxiety, PTSD, and has a history of panic attacks. Due to her physical and mental disabilities, it is important that people communicate directly in front of her in a slow and calm way.
Ms. McGee. You understand what he just told you? He's asking to leave the property now. Put your phone in the purse. Let's go. Grab your roller.
All right. We're just going to have to get it.
Go ahead. Let's go. Let's go. Get up. Get up. Get up. Get up.
Yeah, she's already turned off her hearing aids, stuck her fingers in her ears. Okay. We're moving.
Although Mrs. McGee has hearing aids, they do not fully remedy her ability to hear what is being said. The hearing aids only make it easier to tell whether someone is talking. She relies on lip reading to differentiate words. When her hearing aids are not on the correct setting or are completely off, she cannot hear high and low frequency sounds. She controls her hearing aids through the app on her phone.
Let's go. We're walking now.
You want to handcuff her and put her in the chair, or?
She sits.
Okay. I've got your stuff.
Sit down. Relax.
Don't worry.
Relax. We have it.
We got it.
Put your
We
feet
have
up
your
there.
problem. We have your stuff. Will it make you comfortable if I gave it to you?
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
There you go.
Put your feet up there.
Put your feet up. All right, do it backwards.
According to her lawsuit, as Mrs. McGee was being pushed through the airport, Sergeant Reed stated, if she refuses to do a rideshare, then she is going to jail. However, Mrs. McGee was unable to hear what he said. None of the officers made efforts to effectively communicate the ride-sharing option with her. Mrs. McGee was then rolled out to the arrivals pickup loop outside of the airport. Mrs. McGee remained seated in her wheelchair for a few minutes. After about 10 minutes, she put her suitcase down and slowly stood up out of her wheelchair. The moment she stood up from the wheelchair, Officer Gonzalez forcibly grabbed her left wrist and handcuffed her. As a result of her arrest by Austin Police Department and time in Travis County Jail, Mrs. McGee suffered a broken wrist, lasting psychological injuries including emotional anguish, fear, and panic attacks. She required a part-time caretaker to help her get dressed and make basic decisions following the events in Austin. She is now undergoing intense psychotherapy because of the trauma inflicted on her. Mrs. McGee alleges she was wrongfully arrested by Austin police and subjected to excessive force by either Austin police or Travis County jail deputies in violation of her 4th and 14th Amendment civil rights. Mrs. McGee alleges the City of Austin and Travis County violated Title II of the Americans with Disabilities Act because they failed to provide effective communication for Mrs. McGee on the basis of her disability. Her lawsuit alleges violation of Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 and a Texas state claim for misuse of tangible personal property. Mrs. McGee also brought a claim for excessive force against Officer Doe, who is the unidentified City of Austin or Travis County law enforcement officer who broke her wrist. Karen McGee was only trying to travel to Seattle to visit her sister. Due to her disability, she missed her connecting flight in Austin after there was a gate change because she could not hear the announcement. Delta Airlines rebooked Mrs. McGee on an Alaska Airlines flight. After she was rebooked on Alaska Airlines, Mrs. McGee discovered her cousin was booked on a different Alaska Airlines flight, so Mrs. McGee approached Alaska Airlines agents to try to be rebooked on the same flight as her cousin because her cousin could help her navigate Seattle-Tacoma International Airport once they arrived. Because of Mrs. McGee's disability and her attempts to try to get on a different Alaska Airlines flight, the gate agents called the police and lied by telling them that Mrs. McGee was drunk. Mrs. McGee's hearing aids were not working correctly, and she was trying to fix it by using the app on her phone. Officer Gonzalez informed Mrs. McGee that she would need to go to Delta Airlines to rebook on a flight for the next day because she no longer had a ticket to board a plane. Mrs. McGee did not understand why she needed to leave the terminal, so she remained in her seat. Although Mrs. McGee was asked to leave, we believe Austin police officers should have done more to accommodate Mrs. McGee's disability. Mrs. McGee was not drunk and she could not hear she was being trespassed from the airport. Austin police could have handed Mrs. McGee the trespassing card for her to read. The injuries Mrs. McGee suffered could have been avoided had Austin police officers acted with more common sense and compassion. It wasn't until Mrs. McGee was released from jail 3 days later did she understand she had been arrested for criminal trespass. In light of these circumstances, we believe what happened to Mrs. McGee was not only improper but callously negligent.